In this video, we're going to look at an example of solving a linear inequality. So to begin, what we're going to be solving is 3x minus 2 greater or equal to 9 times x minus 1 minus 3, and we're going to solve that for our variable x. First of all, you should go ahead and try this question on your own before we take up the answer together. In order to do this, what you can first do is to expand on the right-hand side the 9 and the x minus 1 and to collect any like terms. So in this case, you'll end up with a couple of number terms on the right, so you can collect those. That'll make it easier to then do the very important step, which comes next, which is to group all terms that have the variable x in them on one side of the inequality, and all terms that just have numbers, so no x's in them, on the other side of the inequality. It's up to you which side you group the x's on versus which side you group the numbers on. In order to group all like terms on one side, that might mean that you have to add or subtract something from both sides of the equation. Now, once you've grouped all terms with x's on one side and all terms with only numbers on the other side, you can collect like terms on each side, and then you should just have a coefficient of x, and if you go ahead and divide by that coefficient, both sides of the equation, well then you can isolate for your x term. Be very careful when working with linear inequalities of what happens when you divide both sides of the equation by a negative number. Remember, if the coefficient of x ends up being negative, and this may or may not happen, it depends what side you decide to group the x's on, whether you'll end up having a negative coefficient or not. If your coefficient of x is positive, then there's no problem. If the coefficient of x works out to be negative, well then remember, when you divide by a negative number, an inequality sign changes direction. So now go ahead, try this problem, and we'll continue once you're done. Alright, let's go ahead and continue. Let's begin by writing out the inequality that we're trying to solve. Our first step is we can go ahead and expand on the right-hand side. So if we expand the 9, multiplying it through the bracket, times the x, and times the negative 1, we'll end up with 9x minus 9 minus 3. We can then go ahead, of course, and simplify the numbers on the right-hand side, so minus 9 minus 3 gives us the negative 12. Now we can do the very important step of grouping all the x's on one side, all the numbers on the other side. It's up to you to decide which side you'd like the x's on versus which side you'd like the numbers on, and it really doesn't matter. It's actually easier here to move all of the x's to the right, perhaps, because then you'll end up with a positive coefficient in front of the x, so it'll be easier to isolate for the x because you'll just divide both sides by positive and the inequality sign won't be affected. But let's go ahead and actually try moving all of the x's to the left, because then we will end up with a negative coefficient, so you'll be able to see what happens. So if I'd like to move all the x's to the left, what I have to do, on the left I've got 3x minus 2, I'm going to have to subtract 9x, and let me do that in another color so that it's clear. So I'm going to have to subtract 9x from both sides. Also, to move all the numbers to the right-hand side, I'm going to have to add 2 to both sides. And the reason that this works is because then by adding 2 on the left, the minus 2 will go away. And similarly, on the right, if we subtract 9x, well, there'll be no more x's on the right. You can think of this as moving the 9x to the left and changing its sign, but really the rationale is we're subtracting 9x from both sides. Similarly, we're adding 2 to both sides. Now, on the right-hand side, we've got the 9x minus 12, and again, what we're doing is subtracting 9x and adding 2, so we're doing the same thing to both sides. You can see that on the left, the minus 2 and the plus 2 cancel, and on the right, the 9x and the minus 9x cancel. So if we clean this up, we end up with 3x minus 9x on the left and minus 12 plus 2 on the right. While 3x minus 9x gives us minus 6x on the left, and negative 12 plus 2 gives us negative 10 on the right. So now what we have to do is we have to divide both sides, and let's just write a note about that. We're going to divide by negative 6. And what happens in this case is the inequality sign is going to change direction. So we end up with a less than or equal to sign. And that's important. That again occurs because you're dividing by a negative number. And so we end up with negative 10 divided by negative 6. And so what this means is we're going to end up with x less than or equal to, the negative signs cancel, and 10 over 6 in lowest terms is 5/3. So that's our final answer. So now just to recap, our first step was to expand. Next, we collected like terms. In the very important step, we grouped all x terms on the left, and we grouped all numbered terms on the other side. And remember, it's up to you which side the x's go on versus which side the numbers go on. It really doesn't matter. If you had grouped the x's on the right-hand side, well, you would have ended up with 6x less than or equal to 10 right off the bat, and then you would have ended up with x less or equal to 5/3, just as we have here. Remember, once you've collected all x's on one side and all numbers on the other side and collected like terms, you then just isolate for the x by dividing by the coefficient. If the coefficient is positive, no problem. If it's negative, you have to flip the inequality sign. So if it was less than or equal, it becomes greater or equal. If it was greater than, it becomes less than, and so on.